Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Organic Guy podcast. This is your home of organic conversations. I'm your host, the Organic Guy, and around here we have conversation around how we can make our food system really work for us rather than against us. And today it's an honor for me to have a very special guest with us. He's worked very hard in terms of peeling back some of the corruption and some of the injustice that's happening within our Kenyan society. You probably know him. He's an award-winning journalist. He's been doing this for a very long time. So he's the co-founder and CEO of Africa Uncensored. John, welcome to the pod.
Thank you. Thank you very much, man. I appreciate it.
By now, I think a lot of people call you as the OG, or if you like, the veteran of investigative journalism within the country. So I'm not sure how you look at that. Do you look at that as, I'm getting old, or, unappreciative of some of the work you've done?
Well, I'd say a bit of both, right? So I've been doing this now for almost 20 years. So it's a while, right? There's no running from that. There's no denying that. But I'm also learning. I'm also learning a lot about, the investigative field, how things are changing. In my role for the past 10 years, I've been learning more about the business behind journalism. So in as much as, yes, some people call me that, I'm still learning.
Yeah, that's a very good perspective to have, I guess. So I always like to start with, your background, because I'm a huge believer in terms of like how you grew up somehow shapes where you become later in life. So take us back to your early childhood. Help us paint a picture for like how was the environment like? Where did you grow up? Like in terms of personality, who are you? An extrovert, introvert? So what was happening in that space?
I grew up in Limuru, not too far from here. At least most of my late childhood and into my early adulthood. So an agricultural setting, so to speak, not too far from the city, but one nonetheless that had its charm when it came to agriculture and it came to farming. In terms of being an introvert or an extrovert, I'd say most people who know me well would say that I'm not an introvert, but I have those tendencies to be very solitary, just the way I am, right? So I don't mind being on my own. I don't mind hanging out alone. I tend to want to stand maybe in the middle to the back of a crowd at first instinct. But when I get to know somebody, when we become, close, then they'll see another side to me, which is perhaps a little more relaxed, a little less, buttoned up. In terms of early influences, I'd say I grew up in a very close-knit family. So my parents were a huge influence on me. My older brother is until today has quite a bit of influence on who I am and who I've become. I'm the last born, so meaning that I was absorbing as people were forming their personalities. I was absorbing and trying to understand, and therefore I move very easily between generations, and I tend to listen a lot, although I can be also a little aloof. Yeah, so it's a mix of things. A pilau njeri of a person, if you will.
Yeah, that's an interesting background. I mean, we saw last year, I think, when you lost your mom, you gave out a very passionate, I guess, and detailed view of how much your mom meant much to you as well. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind was your Twitter post where you said "fuck cancer," right? So from that perspective, I can only imagine what was going through, especially losing someone who's so close to you as well. So it's just me saying sorry, I guess, what happened to your mom as well.
It's tough to talk about the passing of a loved one. It's tough to talk about that phase, which we all inevitably go through unless we are the ones who are, crossing over, God forbid. But it's made me, at least in these few months, because she passed in December, we're just now moving into May. It's given me, I think, a lot more perspective in terms of life, its meaning, and some of the things that I've placed emphasis on, which perhaps in the grand scheme of things don't really matter that much, and other things that I've been more nonchalant about that I should be more active and more intentional about. My mom was great in terms of her network. I still get surprised by the number of people who have come up to me and said, I didn't know that was your mom. She taught me in Jamhuri, or she taught me in Ololaisa, or she taught me at St. George's or in Alliance, or she was with me in KU. And how close she kept those relationships all through her life. Her funeral and just that outpouring of love was really a testament to mtu ni watu. And she really invested in people. She poured a lot into us, but also a lot into other people. So I miss her. There's a lot I could say, but we are, in terms of the grief and the healing, that's a process. And I wish it was an easy process, but there are easy days.
I can imagine she was very instrumental as well in terms of your upbringing and giving you all the advice and the moral authority as well. So it's very interesting because you actually studied journalism. You went to university and actually studied. It's very rare to come across people nowadays who do that. You find someone did accounting and they are sort of...
And now they're in journalism.
Yeah. So take me through that. Like when you were going to university, like when you were in high school, did you think when you're going to university you wanted to do journalism?
No, I didn't. No, so the picture was forming, slowly. And I think that's just kind of who I am, that things tend to percolate a little bit slower than, with others. And you'll get hints here and there, but, me being slow, I didn't pick up on them. I mean, in high school, my dreams were more around sport and wanting to further that. And when I recognized that my talents, at least at that point in time, were not academic, I thought about joining the army. That thought was very quickly banished from my priorities by my father. But I did know that I wanted to do something that was kind of like the intersection between public affairs and justice. The only people who I saw that kind of had that language to express that were lawyers, right? They were like if you're growing up in the 90s, a lot of the people who were luminaries at that time, James Orengo, Paul Mwite, Gitobui Manyara, all of those guys were like very senior and very sharp legal minds, and they were the ones who were really forming and charting the path in terms of what justice looked like to the public. But then, we were a typical family of gathering around the TV to watch the news. I took more of an interest in that than perhaps my siblings did. And then I guess that started to also just become part of my thinking. Yeah. I have to say, I mean, watching people like Jeff Koinange when he used to do the stuff for Reuters, it used to be called every Saturday at around 5 o'clock on KTN. It was called the Africa Report. I can't remember what it was, but it was a really great magazine show that also then now started exposing me to what storytelling could look like. So I'd say him through that kind of work was also an influence. Watching guys like Linus Kaikai, confronting power, Solomon Ugera, even Julie Geshuru at the time, Julie Butt, she used to present the Inside Story when I was younger. So those are the kinds of influences that I think led me later on. But in high school, nah, man, I had no idea what it is that I wanted to do.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned about wanting to join the army. I mean, you have the body for it, so I can see why that was an option as well. But you actually also played rugby as well. Is it in high school and university?
In high school, in university as well, yes.
So in terms of like sporty person, so you have that personality as well. It's interesting you mentioned the guys who you're now like really shoulder to shoulder. Akina Jeff Koinange, the guys you grew up, but now you literally, as in when you mention about journalism, your name comes across their names as well. So that should be a really proud moment for you as well, I guess.
Well, it is in a sense, because these were people that you looked up to. And the great thing about journalism in Kenya is that, at least when I started, it was a bit of a small, tight crowd, right? And people like Jeff then now come onto the scene, now return, into journalism in 2007. You see them in the field and you're like, wow, these are the guys that I used to watch. Someone like Linus Kaikai, when he came back from SABC, became my boss. So he helped shape a lot of the journalism that I produce. Someone like Joe Ageo, all of these guys, and it's very humbling to have worked with them. And then, there's some people who you have a certain image of, that expression, never meet your heroes, right? So that's also true. You meet guys and you're just disappointed by the kind of people that they are, but then there's other people who really surprise you and and have a really huge impact on your storytelling. Like someone like Catherine Soy in KTN, she used to go by Catherine Wambua. Then her and Robert got married. Her storytelling style, at least in my early days, was just phenomenal. I used to see how much she cared about her work, and I think that also was like an influence on me. So it's nice to be counted amongst those people, but journalism is really a community of practice. So in as much as they were inspirations for my generation, I'm hoping that I can inspire, but also be inspired by people who are coming behind me.
That's all quite interesting, because you mentioned about Inside Story. I guess that was your great breakthrough in terms of joining the media. So what is the story behind it? How did you end up Inside Story in KTN? So
the Inside Story brand existed before I joined KTN, years before. I believe, like I said, Julie Geshuru at the time, she was Julie Butt, was the anchor for the show. I remember people like John Mwendwa and a few others, Solomon Mugera, a couple of other guys contributed pieces to it. And so I used to like that kind of magazine format for storytelling. But when I came back, I thought that, maybe that's how I was going to bring it back. But then, I meet up with... I tell this story so often. I think guys think that I'm lying. Like a young guy who tries to sell me shoes, and I'm broke in a newsroom. And I had, remember those green plastic paper bags with calendars on them? And it's just like his side hustle, because he's also a journalist like I am. He joined slightly, just a few months after me. He's assigned to the sports desk. He performs really well there. Then he starts doing investigative work. And we strike up a friendship. And before long, we start doing stories together. And then, when we stumble onto our big pieces, then, he thinks, okay, well, my brand is Jicho Pevu. And I thought, maybe let me call mine The Inside Story, as an ode to, all of those great journalists in the past. And that's how Inside Story then now re-emerged. And we sustained The Inside Story for, I want to say, probably about 7 to 10 years, and then left. And everything has its time, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, during that time as well, you actually left KTN, you went to NTV, and then you came back to KTN as well. I'm trying to understand, what was going on there? Is it that KTN had better management, or better guardrails for you to tell your story? What happened during that time?
So with KTN was the freedom. Right? We were pretty young as journalists, and the kinds of stories that we're doing were very confronting. But we had an ecosystem around us that appreciated the kind of work that we did. So on the Swahili desk, there were some really important editors and producers. On the English desk, as I'd mentioned, Kai was really important in just saying that this journalism matters, it's important, and it should have a place. And that appreciation then cascaded throughout the newsroom. So for KTN, it was the space to start, make your mistakes, within reason, and grow. And at that time, KTN was like the big brand. So it was very easy to be able to build one's brand. I moved to NTV more for personal reasons, in that there was nothing wrong with KTN. By the time I was leaving, the partnership was going great. I left because I needed to discover who I was as a journalist. Remember at the top of the podcast, I said, things kind of percolate for me a little slower than others. And I just felt that unction to move and sort of now be the one who is in charge of my own storytelling, my own features, etc. How would I tell these stories? How would I learn? How would I grow? And that was a really important time, because then at NTV, who I then get to work with are some of the most experienced journalists in Kenya and East Africa, bar none. I get to meet people like Charles Onyango Obo, who I was a great admirer of his writing. Robert Nagila, who we were sort of friendly competitors with across. I come and then I work with him and I see his work ethic. People like the late, great Rita Tinina, I meet her there, and we even anchor stuff together. We went and did this series of shows called the County Edition. That was so foundational in just helping me grow and appreciate not just my own journalism, but the country. I got to see Kenya as a journalist properly when I was at NTV, because we went to all 47 counties, and I also did some great work there. Then now it was time to return and build what my thoughts were around where journalism ought to go: long form, more special project focused. And then after that, I left to start Africa Uncensored.
Interesting you mentioned about going to start Africa Uncensored, because I think that's a very huge step. Take us through back that thought process, because I'm imagining this is something you thought through or you took your time to start. So what are you thinking? I mean, are you planning 6 months out, like maybe in December, I'm going to start Africa Uncensored, or is just you wake up one time and you're like, you know what, I think it's better if I go out and start Africa Uncensored?
No, I didn't just wake up. So there was that desire to be in charge of my own storytelling. That started much earlier. I'd say the first real conversation that I had about that, beyond just wishing that I wanted to have my own media company, happens in 2011. Obviously, my wife and I had been talking about, this now and again, but the first real one that I remember happens in 2011 with one of my co-founders. We sat at a restaurant just near Kimathi Street, used to be called Gibson's, and we sat there and we talked through what our ideas were, and then kind of like shelved that. And then when we return to KTN and find that it's not the same environment that we had left, that then now is part of the push factors, I'd guess, that pushed us out of the newsroom. The pull factor for me was just thinking that I have something to contribute in terms of journalism, and thinking that I want to tell stories a specific way, that there's a standard that I think, we ought to keep more regularly, and that pushes me out. Then having begun to travel across Africa and seeing some of the storytelling needs that we have, but also just an appreciation for the continent itself, our focus then shifts from Kenya to Africa. And that then pushes us into founding Africa Uncensored.
Okay. So how is it like during the first few months, I guess? Because Africa Uncensored is it's more of a service, more rather than a product kind of. It's not like something you wake up and say, next month I'm producing this product, I'm going to sell it. You're telling stories. So how long does it take for you to get off your feet? I mean, I'm imagining it's 2015. YouTube is not that big yet in terms of like earning something out of it. So how is that process of adjusting?
In some ways, it was difficult because you expect that your brand kind of carries over when you're doing something and building something. But as I can imagine with this podcast, you know what it feels like to build a brand from the ground up, like to build a product, to build a service, to even build a brand from the ground up. And that's difficult. I don't say that it was more difficult for me because I had experienced this kind of brand equity that KTN gave me, but it certainly was shocking when you're walking down the street and then someone was like, nakujua uliendanga wapi, where are you, where can we find your work? From when you guys left, there's nothing. You understand? And you have to keep on just being humble and saying, no, actually, niko kwa mtandao siku hizi, I'm on YouTube and this is my channel, Africa Uncensored. Even sometimes taking their phones and showing them and clicking and that kind of work. So in terms of building the brand, it was an exciting journey. It still is. I'd say it was difficult to realize that, sometimes when you move on, people also move on from you, right? I questioned myself a lot because I wasn't in a particularly bad situation. My job was paying me well enough to maintain my family. I had the eye of the public in terms of being able to anchor news bulletins, plus do the investigative work. I could have managed the politics if I wanted to, but the unction, the need to do this thing was very, very strong at that time. The work, I'd say, was also very exciting We kept long hours. We'd leave the office at 3 in the morning sometimes, working on a story, just trying to make it perfect, and then publish it, and you get 300 views, 400 views, 900 views. When you get 1,000, you're like, yeah, But it's kind of the hard work of building and rebuilding that I take from those early days as being just very valuable. It was very valuable time spent. Obviously, there's other lessons that you learn. I was talking with Leonard Mudachi on his podcast about tax and now that side of the business that you have to learn. But I wouldn't trade it for anything. Perhaps the one thing that I would say is I wish that I had a healthier sort of prioritization of my family at that time, because I don't think that they got the best of me. In as much as my wife and I worked together for 5 years when we were building AUC, I don't think that the kids got the best of me. I was traveling a lot, but sometimes these are kinds of the sacrifices that you have to make. And we are here now.
Yeah, so it was well worth it.
Well, I'd hope so.
Yeah, so during those early days, what story do you think helped propel you or give you an instinct, you know what, I'm doing the right thing? Kanjo, was it Kanjo?
Kanjo Kingdom, yeah, that was our very first one, yeah. So Kanjo Kingdom was big for us because it helped us recognize that actually, there's these stories that people are not paying attention to that have such an important impact on how we just live in our city. And that also drove us then now to do Inspector Fisi, which now focused on the nature of corruption and who it affects. One of my favorite stories from that early time was a series we did called End of the River, where we went into northern Kenya and tried to follow the path of the Wasonyiro, but also tell the stories of the communities who are using that water. It took us deep into Samburu County, it took us into Laikipia County, so a lot of the violence that you saw happening 2018, we were right there when it was all taking place. Met a couple of good people along the way, and it was the first time that I had spent more than 2 years following a story, like going back during the rainy season, going during the dry season, following the herds, following the people, and it gave me such a deep appreciation for that part of the country. But I'd say the story that was a breakout piece for us was one that we did on war profiteering in South Sudan and how that money wound up here. It was called The Profiteers in 2018. Interestingly, it's the one story that up until that point, most of our stories were running on our platform, but also on legacy media. That was the first time we were told, no, this story can't run. And I was livid. And I sent out a tweet, like it was supposed to run on a 9 o'clock news. They had promoted it. I sent out a tweet and said, we've given all of our assurances that we've worked hard on this story editorially, etc. But for some reasons, the management at KTN wasn't ready to run the story. And we said, look, it's their right, but it's our story, so we'll publish. We published and the story blew up. That story led us to a number of things. We got our first international award as Africa Uncensored for it, the Trace International Prize for Reporting on Corruption. We got an award from the Global Investigative Journalism Network. We got an award locally from the annual Journalism Excellence Awards. The story was quoted and cited in the House of Commons. It was screened in countries across Africa. And so it really helped build our profile as journalists who also focused on Africa. So I'd say that was 3 years into working at Africa Uncensored that people then finally sat up and are like, actually, these guys are doing some important work.
So I'm wondering, what is your thought process in terms of deciding on a story to follow? Because stories like The End of the River or Ghetto Gava or, Inspector Fisi, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people who approach you and they're like, I have this idea and that. But what is your thought process up here to decide, I think this is a good story?
The first thing is always who is at the heart of the story. Who does this story affect? And we take the view that we always want to focus on how stories affect the public, especially those who perhaps don't have opportunity to have their stories told. So that's the common thread between Kanjo Kingdom and Inspector Fisi. In Kanjo, it was the informal traders who nobody thought to speak to. but had this really intense story that was happening right under our noses. In Inspector Fisi, it was embedding ourselves inside the matatus to show people that, yes, in as much as matatu culture has its problems, here is how people predate. With even with the profiteers, in as much as we were talking about how that money flowed into the country, we begin our story in a refugee camp in Uganda of South Sudanese, and we tell the story of how this money could have been of use to that young nation. You know, the guys forget that South Sudan is not even 20 years old as a country, right? And so that's the thread. All of the stories that we do, we always try and tell the story of whose voice is not being heard, not being represented. How does it play out in the public domain? But anybody can give us a story. You can give us a lead. We often get leads from the public. People are in my DMs. Sometimes people send emails. Sometimes people meet me on the street. Or us. And then there's also those enterprise stories where we think, okay, this is an important issue. We need to focus on this, and we'll build a suite of reporting around it.
Let's talk about one of your, I think, stories that exploded last year, the Fertile Deception story. For a long time, it became talk of the nation. Take us behind the scenes of following that story. So someone comes to you and says, you know what, I think there's something fishy going on here. So what happens next?
So after the person approaches me, he tells me there's this ridiculous story that you won't believe happening in Kariandusi, and there's people who are packaging soil and selling it as fertilizer. First I laughed, I was like, that's mad. But I want to take you back a couple of years to tell you why sometimes it's important to listen to what people are saying. It was 2011 thereabouts. We were doing the county edition, and my boss comes and tells me, LK, Linus Kaikai at the time, he tells me, John, I don't want you anchoring this weekend. I want to send you to Loliondo in northern Tanzania. There's a very crazy story that I'm hearing about, and I'd like for you to go and explore. And I asked him, what's the story? Apparently there's some herbalist who's giving people medicine, and people are saying that they're healed. And so we go with just that open-mindedness and that journalistic curiosity, and we find what to me is, in all of the stories that I've done, perhaps the most interesting story to have watched unfold. And so now coming to 2022, when this person approaches me, I'm like, yeah, that sounds crazy, but I've seen crazy stuff. So I send someone from our team to see what's going on, and he comes back and he shows me footage, and I'm like, yo, this is mad. So then we get Cynthia Gishiri on the story. And she then now does the work of going to different parts of the country, finding where this fertilizer is being sold, buying different samples from at least 5 NCPB depots, taking it to different labs to have it tested, speaking to farmers from across the country. She did like a lot of the hard work in trying to build up that story, and then finally presenting the facts to the person behind this thing. That entire cycle took us, I think, from the end of 2022, because we first got that lead, I think, around November, all the way into the end of 2023. So that by the time December rolls around, what we're doing is now just, dotting our I's, crossing our T's, and sending our rights of responses. We give an inordinate amount of time to the people who are at the center of the story to respond. They choose not to until they see the trailer. And then there's now like a rush, oh, can we talk? Oh, can I fly you here? Someone called me and told me, I'll even take you in a chopper to the place to show you how these things are working. Like a lot of stuff went on behind the scenes. But ultimately we get out with the story. And as they say, the rest is history.
Yeah, and the crazy part is that you actually sort of brought like public awareness to this matter, because after your story, then a lot of more people came out actually saying, hey, look, my fertilizer is actually fake as well. So what do you think, does that speak to the whole consciousness of Kenyan, like in terms of doing business? Because it wasn't only guys who were selling these diatomite as organic fertilizers. There were actually other people packaging essentially sand as fertilizer.
Yeah, what it told me is that the problem isn't with individuals, it's systemic. again, if I'm just go back to some of our approach in Africa Uncensored, is we try as much as possible within a story that might be telling you about this thing to also look at the systemic issue. What are the things about the system that are causing this to be a problem? And what we then saw is that there were systemic problems with how procurement around fertilizer took place. It was very opaque, the system in which people were getting in, who the vendors were, and also the provenance of the fertilizer itself was a problem. I believe this year they've tried to fix problems with their mezzanine system, with the procurement, etc. But we're still also hearing very sad stories. I won't tell you what they are now until they're proven. But then now, if you were to look at it from now the Kenyan context, it shows you that there's a real impact to corruption. We tend to think of it as a victimless crime. But when it erodes the systems, the institutions that are supposed to hold up a country, then the next thing is that influences business, that influences social interactions. We become very transactional in the way we talk to one another. It's what's in it for me, how can I get this? And if you look out, you'll notice that a lot of that is happening now, and it's increased over the past 3 years, but certainly over the past, say, 14, 15 years, there's been that trajectory where systems are being abused, being cut down to size because they don't fit the image that the big person there would like, and that's the bigger problem.
Yeah, there's the systemic issues as well. You actually were called, I think, to the Senate to sort of testify in your story. So at that time when guys from Parliament are calling you, hey, we need to testify, are you looking at yourself and saying, maybe I should hold myself a little bit back, or you're like, yeah, this is my story, I need to own it, I need to go, whatever happens?
We thought about whether it would be prudent to appear before the Senate committee. We were actually called to the Senate committee as well as to the National Assembly committee. So we appeared twice. And we then came to the conclusion that, if there's anything that affects everyone across the country, it's food and agriculture. And this is one of the key ingredients to our success. How do we grow our food? And so for that reason, we thought it would be important to just tell them essentially what it is that happened in the course of our investigation, perhaps what it points to. This isn't typically how journalism works. Most times people will then take from the stories and then do their own inquiries. It's very rare that the journalist himself or herself is called to a committee to testify. So that for us was also new. But we thought that it was an important thing to do. And coming to the impeachment of Mithika Linturi, fortunately for us, that really wasn't our focus. And it hadn't been. Our focus was really on the work that we had done and the impact that it was having. That then now took its own political direction, and the less said about that, at least from my point of view, the better, because it's not really my province to talk about.
Yeah, that was more of a political problem. And it's quite interesting, at least from my view, that the guy who came out to speak against the fertilizer actually didn't go to any mainstream media. They approached you first. So I think there's something quite interesting that tells about what Africa Uncensored is doing. Somebody's really comfortable to come to you rather than going to a mainstream media.
I mean, it's a good shot in the arm. Like it tells you that you're on the right track, which is a good thing.
After you've exposed this particular fertilizer story, how was the government's reaction according to you? How did they react? They react the way government's supposed to react, or it was sort of more of like a PR move from their part?
Well, so I expected defensiveness because typically, that's how governments behave, and not just ours, but most governments. But I didn't expect that it would go on as long as it did, because it wasn't Jabba. You understand, it wasn't like a fake story that we're coming to tell you. We had evidence of what it is that we were saying. And more than that, other people were talking about other brands of fertilizer, as you said, where the problems persisted. And it was a national issue. So I thought that the defensiveness went on a bit too long. But then there was also positives that came out of it. So there was this move to compensate farmers. There were some reforms that have happened in the agriculture sector with regard to provenance of fertilizer. It's opened people's eyes, and I think that's the most important one. It's opened the farmers' eyes to what it is that they're buying. And so this season and in coming seasons, people will be more aware that this is something that can and does and has happened. And for me, that's where the real impact came. But the government's reaction was it's typical of how governments react. I'm just happy that eventually it moved from defensiveness to actually ownership of the problem.
Another story that I think, at least from me, from an agricultural perspective, I found very interesting was the one you did about poison PR, which was about exposing, some of the work that big corporations, the Bayers, Monsantos, and BSF are doing really to sort of have their influence in local agriculture in terms of some of the products they're selling. The other one about Beta Harvest, showcasing how toxic chemicals are really having an impact in our farmers. So these kind of stories, how do they come by? Like, is it a collaboration with other people who are interested in this space? How do this kind of story have your eye?
So for both of those stories was a product of collaborations where people who understood the industry a bit more came and told us, hey, that there's this problem. You guys, I think you need to look at it. And then we take our approach and we're like, actually, yes, there's a problem with these kinds of pesticides, this category, and this is the impact that it's having on our food. It even led to me doing like campaigns around the provenance of our food and chemicals, etc., outside of the documentaries and the storytelling. But that's typical of how certain stories come about. Why I'd say this one is important, because like I said, food security is really a foundational part of any society. If you're unable to feed your countrymen and women, then you're in trouble. But it's not just about what you're feeding, being able to feed them, but the quality of what it is that you're feeding them. And I think that's an important thing that we tend to miss. It's not, sio bora chakula. Lazima iwe chakula bora, right? So our unga, is it fortified, right? Are we spending time looking at the minimum residual levels of toxic chemicals in our food before we harvest them? Are we applying the same standards for food that's consumed locally to the standards we apply for food that's being exported, right? We need to give ourselves the best. And I think that's something that we also need to appreciate. Like as Kenyans, don't sell, yes, you can sell good products out there, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't also provide good, healthy food for your citizens. I mean, tujipende.
Yeah, and I mean, as for me, someone who is very much intrigued in the agriculture business, that was such an eye-opening documentary for me, and I really encourage anybody who is literally eats every single day to go and look at those documentaries. Very eye-opening for me. So we've talked about a lot of documentaries you've done so far. We mentioned a little bit earlier when you started some of the documentary that you think put you in the spotlight. So far, of all the documentaries you've done, which one do you think is close to your heart? Which one are you really proud of in some of the work you've done?
That's a very difficult question. Because when you try and apply yourself in every story, then every story becomes important. And there'll be a time when, like, the Profiteers was my baby, and then I move on, and there's the invisible line. And so I guess I love different stories for different reasons. So I'll give you maybe like a list. And these aren't necessarily my favorites, but they certainly are important to me for different reasons. So number one, I had mentioned the Loliondo story. For me, that was the most interesting exposition of what, human beings can be like. I don't think there's ever been a time when I've seen something like that happening in front of me and had the privilege of recording that. It was an exciting story to have told. It was funny. It was sad. And I look back very fondly on that time that my colleague Robert Gishira and I went down to Tanzania to tell that story. In terms of, I'd say history, there's two. So there's one that I did at KTN called The First Betrayal. And there's one that I did with Africa Uncensored called The Invisible Line. They kind of exposed similar threads in terms of our history and the impact of colonialism on our governance, and then with The Invisible Line on our policing. But then of late, there's also been the work that my colleagues have done. So I'd say Title Deals as one of the examples, a coming of age of the organization, because the less that I'm involved in the day-to-day doing the work, and we can still produce excellent work, it tells us that we're on the way to success. Fertile Deception was another, and all of the work that's being done. And now it's becoming almost like a regular thing. We had Tracy Bonareri do Blocked at the Bar. We have Tom Mukwana doing so many different things. We've got podcasts coming up. And so it's tough to say one specific one. And like I said, I like them for different reasons.
Obviously, you've done a lot of stories. Some of them are really sad, at least from my view. Some of the stories that I was looking at in The Last Door, especially the ones on murder and stuff, those are very scary stories. So from a mental health perspective, does that affect you in any way?
It's a tough question to answer because I don't know whether I truly am over some of the experiences that I've had, but what helps is talking about it. So my wife and I talk a lot about some of the stories that I've done. In particular, let me give you the example of The Last Door. When I was done filming season 2, I was mentally exhausted. And when I look back on that, because The Last Door is really a true crime series and every episode is about a murder, and it's ghastly, and you have to meet with families who are looking for justice and they haven't found it in some instances. I tended to sort of put up this wall in my mind where I'd say, it's not me who's gone through this, so I shouldn't be so affected by it. But then over time it builds and you tend to get more frustrated with the fact that there's no justice for people like Carlton Minor, as an example. And that's what impacted me the most. It's helped to talk about it. I haven't sought mental help for that specific series, and I should. That's why I'm saying I don't know whether I'm done with that journey, but I certainly have talked about it. And it's tough to get over. And I hate talking about it because, like I said, it's not me who went through those things. But I guess trauma can also be vicarious. I just wish that we treated one another better, I guess.
For sure. Yeah, I can only imagine, because I watched some of those series and I'm like, how do you get through it? Because when your mind is like stationary, or it just comes up with those kind of thoughts. So I can't imagine you being there interviewing the victims themselves. I can imagine those stories sometimes just play in your mind. So it's very interesting, as you say, sort of distancing yourself from this kind of stories, and it really helps that you have a really good support system around you to talk about it. Yeah,
it does. And I get maybe once a week I'll get someone who comes up to me and tells me, I love the series, when are you doing another one? And in my mind I'm like, I've just arrived, just give me time, just give me time to get over all of this, and then maybe we'll do something else.
Yeah, but The Last Door was a really well-produced series.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that.
Yeah, it was of a great quality. I enjoyed it myself. So also during the, I think there was a time there was a conversation around donors, and especially during the Ford Foundation kind of saga. And there's a lot of people, especially on social media, who are like, Africa Uncensored is also working with donors in their work. From your perspective, I think you gave a really good answer in terms of judge us by the fruits that we've done. So can you help us paint a picture during that time? How was it for you, and how was it for Africa Uncensored?
I was surprised that we were the ones who were being targeted, because what we were doing really was just reporting what we saw, right? We weren't adding any extra fino anywhere else, etc. We were reporting what was happening on the ground, and that's the job of journalists, right? And I was surprised by how vociferous, the people who are pushing that narrative were being. But what I wasn't surprised about was the narrative itself, because when you're applying for grants and that kind of, money from from foreign philanthropy, you know that there's a certain line that you have to walk. You know that the work that you do has to represent a certain quality and authenticity, most especially, so that you can justify why it is that this money was important for you to be able to run. I wish there was a greater interest in donating for the public good or funding work that is in the public's interest, because many times it won't have as clear a commercial path as other products or services. Yeah. I really wish that that was something that happened here. But, short of that, what I have are the values in our organization that save us from taking the wrong kind of money. And even if, because it hasn't happened, even if we were told you must do this with this money, having the backbone to walk away from that I'd say is what we've worked on the most. And I see it not just within me, but within people who I work with, who have said no to different kinds of jobs, different kinds of money that has come their way because they believe in the mission. And for us, at the end of the day, the mission is important. It's important for us to do this work, because if we don't do it, and we then now put our hands up and say, we will only wait until the perfect situation when the money for doing this work is something that we can generate internally, or so much will happen, so many things will pass. And I'd say it's important for us to imprint ourselves on society. And again, judge us by the work that we do. The work that we do has always been true. It's been factual. And it's used the tenets of journalism. And I'd say to great effect.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the only answer you can give in terms of judge us by our fruits, right? So, I mean, people can say all they want, but all they have to do is just look at some of the work that you've done.
It should be a no-brainer, but here we are,
Especially nowadays, people get paid for views and clicks, so you can say there's an incentive to have those kind of attacks on you as well. I mean, you have been at the forefront of exposing corruption and just highlighting some of the social injustices has been happening in the country. So I'm just wondering, from you personally and also from Africa Uncensored, what kind of legacy do you think you will leave, or what kind of legacy are you working towards or is it something that never crosses your mind?
I was told this recently, a person's story is written at the end. So I don't know what legacy I will leave behind, but what I hope that the legacy of Africa Uncensored will be that we were or are, continue to be the last word, where people can depend on us for factual work, credible work that helps explain the world around them and helps them navigate forward, be it in investigative work, be it in the podcasts that we produce, in the trainings that we do, be it in our journalism and our non-journalistic work, that we chose to be that for Kenya and for Africa. I'd hope that the legacy would also include us building an organization that outlasts every one of us who are working there now for years to come, centuries even. I'd hope that the legacy of Africa Uncensored is to have a planning horizon of 100 years, 200 years, where we are looking that far into the future of our country and our organization and our continent. Finally, I'd say personally, I'd hope that my legacy is that people look to my body of work and say that here is a person whose dedication to the values that the work espoused and to his country and his continent shone through in his work. Here is an example of what it means to actually care about being comfortable in your own skin and being an African that really is interested in the development of our societies. And then ultimately, when then now people are placing dirt on me, is that here lies a good man. That one is more important actually for me, for my family to say of me than of anybody else.
Yeah, that's nice to hear. So far, you've done everything, I guess, that you could. I mean, you've produced some of the amazing documentaries. You've managed to really found a great organization in terms of, you talk about leaving a legacy and continuing it. So far, you've been able to do that in terms of building a really good team that can produce great quality work without, your presence. So what then continues to get you up in the morning? What continues to motivate you moving forward?
It's a mix of things. Let me start with the immediate ones. It's ensuring that my family has a good life, ensuring that I'm an example to our children of what it means to work at something that you care about. It's wanting to succeed. I want to be successful. At some level, I also want to be rich. I want to be comfortable, but I want to do it the right way. I'd also be remiss if I didn't say that there's an aspect of leadership that I think gets me up every day. I want to lead. I want to show the way through my own example, even in the missteps of someone who's trying to get it right. My co-host on the Big Picture, Justine, she loves Kendrick. And so if she watches this, she'll be very proud of me. There's a line in this song that he has with SZA. He says, I want the credit if I'm winning or I'm losing. And winning is easy, right, to get the credit. But are you able to take that L, when the time comes? I want to have the backbone to be able to say yes. I don't know whether in every instance I can, but that's what gets me up in the morning. And then also just life, man. Like, you have to live, you have to eat, there's those basics that get you up in the morning.
So since this being a really primarily agricultural podcast, it would be a reminiscence of me not to ask you this. Have you ever been involved yourself in agriculture?
So not at scale. And I'm sure my siblings, if they listen to this, would be like, not at all. But I did in the early days, accompany my mom when she was a proper green thumb. I remember her winning some local awards for her farming and her terracing system, because where we were farming, it was very steep land. And then she was also involved in chicken and in cows, and so you have that basic operating knowledge of how to milk a cow, how to skin a goat. So I have that basic knowledge. Would I love to return to farming? Yes. I'd say that's also a dream that my wife and I sort of have together. I know my wife is perhaps even more dead set on it than I am, but we have this dream where we will one day sit on our farm and watch the wheat and the maize and the different crops and the fruits sort of like blow in a breeze. Yeah, so at heart, I'd say that yes, that is something that I'm hoping that we can do. And we'd love for it obviously to be organic.
Pretty good. Yeah, the fact that she's very much invested in it, it's almost a guarantee it's probably going to happen. So they always get their ways.
God willing, if I behave myself, yes, it'll happen.
Yeah, it's always interesting. This question, almost everybody says they do want to get into agriculture in some way, or shape or form, into their later in life. So it's always interesting to see that perspective, no matter their career directions, lawyers, journalists. So they always see an agricultural future. So that's an always perspective to have.
And I'm not saying that I'd do it at scale. Yeah. Like even a kitchen garden for me would be enough.
Yeah. Okay. It's pretty good. So this is part of the podcast that I usually do. So towards the end of the conversation, I have something I call the rapid fire questions. So what I've done is I prepared 10 questions for you. So the idea is really for you to give like quick answers to the questions. There is no right or wrong answers, basically like an appreciation of what you are or who you are and what has happened in your life so far. So I think it should be fun. Are you ready?
Ready.
All right. So the first question is, what was the first career you dreamed of having as a kid?
President.
Second question, if you had to eat only one meal for the rest of your life, what will it be?
Just one. It would have to be something chicken, but cooked a particular way. There's another chicken that my wife does, it's marinated, that Let me not nitaanza kumeza mate hapa bure.
So the third question, when you're off the grind, how do you recharge?
Working out. I love to catch a good movie with my wife or my kids. I've gone back into reading. Yeah, and then also just catching a pint with good friends.
The fourth question, what is one story you haven't told yet but dream of investigating one day?
I don't know what the specific subject matter would be, but it has to be something that awakens Africa to some of the things that have happened to us and continue to happen to us. But more than that, to the opportunity that lies ahead if we get our act together. So I can't say what specific subject it would be, but I can tell you what I'd want someone to feel one day watch it. I want someone to feel angry but also invigorated and ready to just go out and do something that changes their fortunes and the fortunes of others.
The fifth question, where is one place you like to go that you haven't been?
Heaven. Yes.
It's a pretty good choice. Sixth question, what is your favorite book?
There's this book that I've read more than twice. It's called Have a Little Faith. It's by a sports journalist, interestingly, called Mitch Albom. But my favorite writer is Ta-Nehisi Coates. He's an African-American journalist and professor. He writes both fictional and non-fictional stuff.
The seventh question, who is one Kenyan change maker or activist that you think more people should know about?
I'd say more people should appreciate Nanjala Nyabola. I'd say she's a really proper thinker about this country. All of the social justice centers that have popped up across the country, I'd say are doing such important work. So it's not one person, but you likely have a social justice center near where you live. You need to go and see what they're doing.
So the eighth question, what has been your most fulfilling moment since launching Africa Uncensored?
My most fulfilling moment since launching Africa Uncensored will have to have been realizing that journalism has come of age, as I'd mentioned. Seeing other people succeed within Africa Uncensored.
Ninth question, what quote resonates with you most?
You know that quote that is extracted from the Teddy Roosevelt speech about the man in the arena. It's not the critic who counts, because that quote tells you everything you need to know about the imperfection of choosing to do something, that you're not going to get it right. Many times you'll come up short. Many people will complain or criticize you, but that you're the one who's doing the important work.
So the last question, knowing what you know now, what advice could you give to your 18-year-old self?
Don't be such a people pleaser. Don't sacrifice your well-being and the well-being of those who love you for the comfort of others who may not appreciate the kind of lengths that you go to. This is one that I'm still learning. I'd say sometimes it's good to take the scenic route. Don't rush into things and out of things. Think about things a little more. Because when you're 18, you're not thinking very clearly. And just work on yourself. Don't be swept by the crowd. Just work on yourself. Do the internal work that you need to do. I don't think a lot of 18-year-olds are told that. I don't know if you've ever met a person who, when you sit down with them, you're like, wow, man, this person is really just so comfortable in their own skin. Yeah. It's because they've done the internal work of recognizing who they are. And those people have had to fight a lot to know that. Start that fight. 18-year-old John-Allan, start that fight early so that by the time you're 42, 43, the things that you're learning about yourself are more in line with how you want to finish than how you want to live your life day to day.
I guess that's a very powerful and good advice, I guess. So that brings us to the end of the conversation. So I want to especially thank you for creating time for this podcast. I guess someone may want to follow you on social media or African Uncensored. How can they do that?
So you can follow us on AF Uncensored on X, Africa Uncensored on Instagram, Africa Uncensored on TikTok, Africa Uncensored on LinkedIn, Africa Uncensored on YouTube, and www.africauncensored.online. We also have a WhatsApp channel, so you can follow us there as well. Our newsletter is coming back, the deep dive, so that's another opportunity. And then you can follow me on @John-Allan Namu on X and on Instagram and on TikTok as well.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, the deep dive is a pretty good newsletter. I follow it on Substack. It's a must follow as well. So really appreciate it. So thank you very much. A lot of guys will find value from listening to this podcast. Thank you very much for being open sharing your experiences so far. So that's really, really appreciated.
Thank you for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Right. Till the next one, remember to be organic. Cheers.